Grove of the Unborn. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tabithat. Grove of the Unborn by Lynn Venable. Tyndall heard the rockets begin to roar, and it seemed as though the very blood in his veins pulsated with the surging of those mighty jets. Going? They couldn't be going. Not yet, not without him. And he heard the roaring rise to a mighty crescendo, and he felt the trembling of the ground beneath the room in which he lay, and then the great sound grew less and grew dim, and finally dissipated in a thin hum that dwindled finally into silence. They were gone. Tyndall threw himself face down on his couch, the feel of the slick, strange fabric cold and unfriendly against his face. He lay there for a long time, not moving. Tyndall's thoughts during those hours were of very fundamental things, that beneath him, beneath the structure of the building in which he was confined, lay a world that was not Earth, circling a sun that was not Sol, and that the ship had gone and would never come back. He was alone, abandoned. He thought of the ship, a silver streak now in the implacable blackness of space, threading its way homeward through the stars to Sol, to Earth. The utter desolation which swept over him at the impact of his aloneness was more than he could endure, and he forced himself to think of something else. Why was he here, then? John Tyndall, third engineer of the starship Polaris. It had been such a routine trip, ferrying a group of zoologists and biologists around the galaxy, looking for unclassified life-supporting planets. They had found such a world circling an obscure sun halfway across the galaxy. An ideal world for a search expedition, teeming with life. The scientists were delighted. In a few short months they discovered and catalogued over 1,000 varieties of flora and fauna peculiar to this planet, called Aral, after the native name which sounded something like Ahahahro. Yes, there were natives, humanoid, civilized and gracious. They had seemed to welcome the strangers. As a matter of fact, they had seemed to expect them. The Arrillians had learned English easily, its basic sounds not being too alien to their own tongue. They had quite a city there on the edge of the jungle, although in circling the planet before landing the expedition had noted that this was the only city. On a world only a little smaller than Earth, one city, surrounded completely by the tropical jungle which covered the rest of the world. A city without power, without machinery of any kind, and yet a city that was self-sufficient. Well-tilled fields stretched to the very edge of the jungle, where high walls kept out the voracious growth. The fields fed the city well and clothed it well, and there were mines to yield up fine metal and precious gems. The Earthmen had marvelled, and yet it had seemed strange. On all this planet just one city, with perhaps 500,000 people within its walls. But this was not a problem for the expedition. The crew of the Polaris and the members of the expedition had spent many an enjoyable evening in the dining hall of the palace-like home of the Rajal, who was something more than a mayor and something less than a king. Actually, Aral seemed to get along with a minimum of government. All in all, the Earthmen had summed up the Arrillians as being a naive, mild and courteous people. They probably still thought so. All of them, that is, except Tyndall. Of course, now that he looked back upon it, there had been a few things. That business about the Bugs, as the Earthmen had dubbed the odd, ugly creatures who seemed to occupy something of the position of a sacred cow in the Arrillian scheme of things. The Bugs came in all sizes. That is, all sizes from a foot or so in length up to the size of a full human. The Bugs were not permitted to roam the streets and marketplaces like the sacred cows of the earthly Hindus. The Bugs were kept in huge pens, which none but a few high-ranking priests were permitted to enter. And although the Earthmen were not prevented from standing outside the pens and watching the ugly beasts munching grass or basking in the sun, the Arrillians always seemed nervous when the strangers were about the pens. The Earthmen had shrugged and reflected that religion was a complexity difficult enough at home, needless to probe too deeply into the Arrillian. But the time had been something else again, bringing with it the first sign of real Arrillian fanaticism and the first hint of violence. Tyndall and 4 companions were strolling in a downtown section of the city when all at once a hoarse cry in Arrillian shattered the quiet hum of street activity. "What did he say?" asked one of Tyndall's companions, who had not learned much Arrillian. I think... a time... What could..." He never finished the sentence. All about them Arrillians had prostrated themselves in the rather dirty street, covering their faces with their hands, lying face down. The Earthmen hesitated a moment, and a priest of Arrill appeared as though from nowhere, a wicked scimitar-like weapon in his hand, and a face tense with anger. "Dare you!" he hissed in Arrillian. "Dare you not hide your eyes at a time?" He pushed one of the Earthmen with surprising strength, and the latter stumbled to his knees. All 5 men hastened to ape the position of the prostrate Arrillians. They knew better than to risk committing sacrilege on a strange planet. As Tyndall sank to the ground and covered his eyes, he heard that priest mutter another sentence, in which his own name was included. He thought it was, "You, Tyndall, even you." A few moments later a bell sounded from somewhere, and the buzzing of conversation began around them, along with the shuffling, scraping sound of many people getting to their feet at once. A hand touched Tyndall's shoulder, and an Arrillian voice, laughing now, purred, "Up, stranger, up, the time is past." The Earthmen got to their feet. Everything about them was the same, as though nothing had happened. People strolling along the street, going in and out of shops, stopping to chat. "I guess that was the all clear," commented one wryly. The others laughed nervously, but Tyndall was strangely troubled. He was thinking of the strange words of the priest. "You, Tyndall, even you." Why should he have known and not the others? He tried to forget it. Arrillian was a complex tongue with confusing syntax. Perhaps the priest had said something else. But Tyndall knew one thing for certain: the mention of his name had been unmistakable. The mood hung on, and quite suddenly Tyndall had asked, "I wonder about the children. Why do you suppose it is?" One of the men laughed. "Maybe they feed them to the bugs." At no time during their stay on Arrill had they seen a single child, or young person under the age of about 21. The crew had speculated upon this at great length, coming to the conclusion that the youngsters were kept secluded for some reason known only to the Arrillians, probably some part of their religion. One of them had made so bold as to ask one of the scientists, who politely told him that since his group was not composed of ethnologists or theologists, but of biologists and zoologists, they were interested neither in the Arrillians, their offspring, nor their religion, but merely in the flora and fauna of the planet, both of which seemed to be rather deadly. The expedition had had several close calls in the jungle, and some of the plants seemed as violently carnivorous as the animals. It was just a few days after the incident that the Arrillians kidnapped Tyndall. It had been a simple, old-fashioned sort of job, pulled off with efficiency and dispatch as he wandered a few 100 feet away from the ship. It was late, and he had been unable to sleep, so he had strolled out for a smoke. The night watch must have been somewhere about on patrol, probably only a few 100 feet away on the other side of the ship. It happened suddenly and silently. The hand clapped over his mouth, the forearm constricting his windpipe, his legs jerked out from under him, and a rag smelling sickly sweet shoved under his nose, bringing oblivion. When he came to consciousness, he found himself in this room, and he knew that since then many days and nights had passed. His wants were meticulously attended to, his bath prepared, his food brought to him regularly, delicious and steaming, with the generous supply of full-bodied Arrillian wine to wash it down. Fresh clothes were brought to him daily, the loose-flowing, highly ornamented robe of the Arrillian noble. Tyndall knew he was no ordinary prisoner, and somehow this fact made him doubly uneasy. And then, tonight, the ship had blasted off without him. Tyndall could easily reconstruct what had happened when his crewmates had inquired about him at the palace and in town. Tyndall? Then a sorrowful expression, a shrugging of the shoulders, a pointing towards the death-infested jungle, and a mournful shaking of the head. Sign language, which in any tongue meant, "Tyndall wanders too far from your ship. He becomes lost. Alas, he does not know our jungle and its perils." Those who spoke a little English would make some expression of sympathy. Maybe the crew was a little suspicious. Maybe they thought there was something fishy about the thing. And then they thought of the unhappy results of what was commonly referred to as an interplanetary incident. Ever since the people of the second planet of Alpha Centauri, in the early days of extraterrestrial exploration, had massacred an entire expedition because the captain had mortally insulted a tribal leader by refusing a sacred fruit, such incidents had been avoided at all costs. And so they dared not offend the Arrillians by questioning the veracity of their statements. and the jungle was deadly, so they looked a little longer and asked a few more questions. After a little while, the scientists had